Hi everyone, welcome to the March 12th edition of the Timeform US Pacecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski as we look back at last week's racing from around the country, focusing primarily on Tampa Bay Downs, where Saturday's feature race was their premier event, the Derby Prep, the Grade 3 Tampa Bay Derby. A lot of drama around that race that wasn't necessarily focused on the horses competing on the racetrack. We'll talk about that briefly when we get to it, but that was the major card this past Saturday. Craig and I also covered those races on the Timeform US forecast last week. So we'll recap some of that stakes action, including the undercard races like the Challenger, Hillsborough, Florida Oaks, and so forth, as well as some notable speed figures from a race earlier in the week. We'll also on this podcast cover Santa Anita. Their feature race there last Saturday was the Grade 1 Beholder Mile. That was the only Grade 1 race of this past weekend. So we'll chat about that as well as the Santa Isabel. Perhaps an Oaks Prep on that card as well, although I don't think the winner of that race is one that we will see in the starting gate on the first Friday in May. Then we'll move on to Gulfstream Park, stakes action there on Saturday of the sprint variety, including a dirt and a turf stakes. And we'll finish things up with the Grade 2 Azeri at Oaklawn Park, which did result in an upset finish. But Craig, the major conversation on Saturday was centered around the Tampa Bay Derby and all of the drama around that race, that tote delay between the Florida Oaks and the Tampa Bay Derby, and the lack of uncertainty, lack of communication around it. And it sort of overshadowed the actual race.
That's for sure. It definitely overshadowed it. It's unfortunate that it happened. We've gotten some press releases. At this point, I don't even care what they say. We need to do better with this stuff. We can't have this. It seems to happen on big days. It's always something, I should say. So I don't really want to dwell on it. It's one of those things that I just hope that the people in charge will do something. I'm sure it really stinks for Tampa. I mean, it sounds like they have nothing to do with what happened, and yet they're probably cost a fortune in the event of this. So just not a great situation. As for the race, maybe it's kind of fitting given the way the race played out. I mean, it was a good, exciting race, but numerically, and particularly when you watch the beginning of the racing, you see a Derby Prep with a 25 quarter and 51 half. It's kind of silly at this point how often we see these things. It just seems like the game's changed quite a bit. I wound up originally in the chart. I gave the winner Domestic Product a pace upgraded 96 Timeform US speed figure. The more I looked at the chart, I think I underdid it. So I went back this morning as we record this on a Tuesday and upgraded it about 6 points more, because even with the prior pace upgrade, nearly every horse in the race declined quite a bit. So it's going to go up to about a 102. How much relevance that figure has, I have no idea, because it wasn't really a race. It was a sprint to the wire.
Yeah, I mean, I'll respond about the race first and then get to other stuff. But it's just a hard race to know what to make of. And I think Domestic Product becomes a really difficult horse to assess moving forward, Craig, because this horse has now competed in two of the Derby Preps this season that have featured the slowest paces, including this one and the Holy Bull prior to it. Both races, I believe, got pace upgrades. I know they both had blue color-coded fractions in Timeform US, and I think Domestic Product ran well within the context of both of those races. He was one of the only horses to actually pass runners in the stretch of the Holy Bull, and then same thing here. This race was mostly dominated towards the front end by the horses that were leading early, the 1, 2, 3 runners at the first and second calls, who ended up finishing 2, 3, 4 in this race. And Domestic Product did close from just behind those runners to get the job done. So I think he deserves credit for that. And he definitely was finishing with a lot of speed, though, like you said, off glacially slow fractions. I mean, it's just hard to really fathom how a race like this could wind up going so slowly in the early stages. I mean, these are 3-year-olds, many of which have run in sprint races in the recent past, so they're clearly capable of running much faster. It just seems like the jockeys get it in their heads that they want to be careful about getting the distance, and they just overdo it. And I mean, some that maybe come out of the starting gate thinking that there's other speed in the race and they don't want to be too aggressive. I mean, if you come out with the plan to rate your horse and that's what everyone is thinking, you wind up with situations like this, where a horse like Good Money under Arado Ortiz winds up setting the pace, and no one's really pressuring him. He can just back it down as far as he wants, go as slow as he wants, and it just turns into this sprint to the wire, which doesn't really create a true test of these horses' abilities. It's just the test of who can run the fastest final 5/16, and that doesn't really tell us who's going to be the most effective horse marching on towards the Kentucky Derby. So I would say that Domestic Product has shown enough at this point to be a horse that I think you can have some intrigue about moving on to the first Saturday in May, because he's definitely done some things right in these last couple of starts. But where his true ceiling lies, I think it's just really hard to know based on the way these last two preps have been run.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I'm not knocking the horse. He did what he had to do. It's not like he's a front runner. He's a horse who came from off the pace and won anyway. I wonder what the connections of No More Time are thinking after they took a rider off, and Paco Lopez, who's normally very aggressive, and instead changed in this race and wound up sitting off a long shot and getting beat. Maybe it wouldn't have mattered, but that was a horse who went fast early when he won the Sam Davis, took it to everybody in red fractions, and had plenty left to win the race. So it certainly didn't work out for him in this case, because going that slow kept Domestic Product in the race, a horse he's probably never going to outkick it in the last stretch if they're that close together. So just to me, it's disappointing. I hate seeing this, but yeah, I'm not taking anything away from the winner. I just think we don't really know how good he is. And luckily, and who knows if it'll play out this way, but I saw the interview with Ren Carruthers after the race, because I was sticking around to see what was going to happen with the wagering. And it sounds like Chad Brown wants to run this horse again. He said he doesn't want to kind of just play the waiting game. He wants to run him in another prep. So hopefully that'll be the case.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see this horse again, because I think we still have a lot of questions about him from a handicapping standpoint. And your point about No More Time is well taken, Craig. We've talked about this phenomenon quite often. When you've got a speed horse, going as slow as possible on the front end is often a negative for those horses' chances in dirt races. I mean, we saw No More Time be successful setting an early pace ratings of 136. So if you're looking at the Time Form US chart for the Sam F. Davis, his pace rating for or pace figure, I should say, for the second call of this Tampa Bay Derby was a 51. I mean, that's a stark difference, and I think it really negatively affected the chances of No More Time to win this race. That said, both of these horses are safely in the Kentucky Derby field on points. I think Chad just wants to run Domestic Product again for himself to learn a little more about this horse before he competes at Churchill Downs. So we'll see how these move ahead, but it's just a difficult race to assess. And as for all of the tote issues and that stuff, I mean, it's hard to know what to say about it, Craig. I mean, there's been plenty of reporting at this point for people that haven't seen. Matt Hegarty, our colleague, wrote some articles explaining what they say happened on the Daily Racing Form website, if you want to go check that out. Apparently, there was a major network outage that caused a loss of communication between Roberts Communication Network and Amtote, the tote company, as well as the racetrack of Tampa Bay Downs. And I think it was sort of triangulated with also being an outage for Tampa. I think they were potentially, or it was insinuated that they were using a similar network provider. So it just was a different situation with those three major outage, with that outage affecting Tampa sort of from three directions, as opposed to other tracks where it's just affecting them from two directions. That's my understanding of it, which is why we saw some payouts come through for other tracks and not for Tampa. I know people have plenty of theories about whether or not that's valid. And, the rumor mill was running wild on Saturday night, which you could understand, because I think just in a general sense, based on a lot of things people have seen, there's just a lack of faith and integrity of wagering on the races. And when something like this happens, whether or not it's for legitimate reasons, or whether or not the cause is even from within the horse racing world, people just have a lot of skepticism around anything they hear about this kind of stuff. So I think that is something you have to respect, and hopefully, hopefully there's an investigation, not to find out what happened, because it sounds like we know what happened, but just to see whether the contingencies that are in place when something like this, some unforeseen circumstance like this does transpire, that we're doing everything possible to keep the game afloat, because it's not. It's really unfortunate for Tampa. I mean, they got the short end of the stick. I mean, it sounds like this could have happened for the first race on a Wednesday based on the reason that they gave. But for all of the moments that it would happen, the run up to the biggest race of Tampa Bay Downs season, that's a wild coincidence. And it's really unfortunate for them.
Yeah, my one thing, and the only thing that I understand, I was a communications guy in the Air Force for the last several years of my career. So I get it. Stuff happens. Nothing's ever perfect. I was working on things a lot more important than horse racing, and we still had outages. The thing that really annoys me, and it just goes back to how we have all these wagers and the rules don't really makes sense. They haven't kept up with all the wagers, because I'm sure I'm not the only one who was live to the 5 and the pick 5 and pick 4s and things like that. And it's a race where we watched it. The 5 won the race. The pool was already closed. And yet when the payoffs come out, it's for an all. So I just look at it as people who bet the 5 had money taken from them and given to people who bet other horses that lost. And I just think that situation stinks. And I'm sure it's just going to keep happening, because there seems to be no impetus, even with stuff like this, for things like that to change. And it's very frustrating as a horse player.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps the reason for this was not the tote system in this country, but that doesn't change the fact that the inflexibility of the tote system in this country has been a real thorn in the side of horse players for a very long time. And I think that this incident, when something unforeseen goes wrong like this, it just highlights those issues that people may not understand. I think so Tampa Bay Downs wasn't exactly sure what was going to happen in this situation, because it was, well, number one, unprecedented and uncommon, but also when you have to make a race a non-wagering event, and you run the race and there's an official result, and then you have to tell people that, well, yes, it's an official result, but it doesn't count for your bet. That's some difficult messaging. And I think we have to look at that and see if the rules and the technology that's in place to handle these situations could allow for some contingencies for horse players that would benefit them. I don't know the answers to all of that. Not our job to figure it out. But I mean, hopefully there is a conversation about that, because it sounds like everyone's just kind of satisfied with the finger pointing that happened after this at this point. I mean, no, it's not Amtote, it's RCN, and RCN says, no, it's our network provider, and the end. But I don't think it should be the end. I think we have to take a look at not just why this happened, but if something like this happens again in the future, how can we mitigate it, and how can we better communicate to the horse players that are just kind of left in the dark when they're waiting for their payouts and they've invested their money and they're not hearing anything or getting anything back. Let's move on to some other racing action from Tampa Bay Downs on Saturday. Well, Craig, they ran a dirt race, a graded stakes, going the same distance as the Tampa Bay Derby on this card. As a speed figure maker, I don't think it did you much help that the Grade 3 Challenger was run a little bit earlier this day, because it's hard to compare the time of this race to the Tampa Bay Derby, given the wild differences in paces. As for the winner of the Challenger, Skippy Longstocking, he did bounce back with a better effort. I wouldn't say this is the best that we've seen of Skippy Longstocking, but at least it was a competitive performance from him and a bounce back to form, because it was a concerning effort that he had put forth prior to this in the Pegasus World Cup.
Yeah, it was good to see him come back. He was fine. It was a Grade 3 race, and like we said, that's kind of what he's been all along. He ran a 1:19 Timeform US speed figure, right in line with all his winning speed figures. At times, he's run a little faster when he's chasing better horses, but yeah, I thought it was a good effort from him. I'm sure we're going to see him in more similar races of this going forward, and just good to see him rebound. It was an easy win. I know we both tried to beat him in our preview. The horse you like took his shot. He went to the lead as expected, just not quite good enough. The horse I liked just wasn't good enough either. He ran fine, Sherlock's Jewel. So Grade 3 race. I'm not going to get too excited about it. The news for me is that Skippy Longstocking obviously seems fine.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add about that race. He ran okay, just wasn't facing particularly strong competition. Over to the turf course, the Grade 2 Hillsborough was run a couple races before that featured the Tampa Bay Derby, and kind of a similar situation to the future race, Craig, where we kind of knew it ahead of time when there was the scratch of market segmentation, who looked like the controlling speed, and also another horse with tactical speed. When those two came out, this looked like a paceless race on paper, and you could just kind of see by looking at the riders involved that nobody was going to be too aggressive. And I wouldn't even say that Jorge Ruiz had a real plan to go to the front on Sparkle Blue. He just sort of found himself there by default because everybody else rated, and she was able to take them gate to wire because we know she can finish. And when they allowed her to get the early lead through moderate fractions, actually extremely slow fractions, there was no catching her.
No, this was kind of different than the Tampa Derby, I would say, in the fact that she's not a front runner, unlike the runner up in that race. She just kind of inherited the lead, and we know she can finish races. I know we were both somewhat interested in her in this spot, but we're worried about the pace. If you told me a horse like this is going to be gifted an easy lead on the front end, I would be more than happy to take it. And Ruiz certainly took it and was able to win the race. I wound up giving her a 123 Timeform US speed figure. It's definitely a huge pace breakout. It's almost one of those races that was so slow early, it kind of broke the algorithm. We gave the runner up a huge figure. It's one I'll probably have to go back and revisit because I'm not really comfortable with that number for Aspen Grove. It fell in line for everybody else, but it's just another one. I don't know how trustworthy any numbers from this race would be. Good effort from the winner. She's a good horse, as we talked about. I mean, she's a 120s type runner almost every time she shows up. So she's good. It's just the circumstances certainly helped her out in this spot.
Yeah, I would argue we've upgraded this fig a little too much, not just because of the runner-up. And I know the algorithm, what it's trying to show here, I mean, we're giving a number 10 points higher to Aspen Grove, who was second in this race, is that Aspen Grove is the one that really deserves the upgrade because she was the only horse to make up ground into that extremely slow pace. She was actually last coming around the far turn and was able to get up for second, albeit saving some ground and getting a decent trip from that standpoint, not going wide, whereas others I think were a little more compromised from that standpoint, though obviously we don't take ground loss into effect for the Timeform US speed figures. But Craig, with a race like this, when the figs are all going to be so closely grouped for a field like this that was so bunched at the wire, I look at the last place finisher, Embrace Me, who was just so plainly overmatched on paper, and she only lost this race by 3 lengths, and we end up giving her a career best by 10 points. To me, that feels a little wrong. I think while Sparkle Blue is a horse capable of running a 123, to me it makes much more sense to give her a number like 8 to 10 points lower than that, because this just wasn't a race where anybody had to really put forth their best effort to win, except maybe Aspen Grove, who did do some good work to close for second. It would make sense that she ran a career best, but the others, I don't think that I'd be too upset if I saw them get a lower number in the PPs. I'd know how to handle it.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I kind of wait and I do the work and then I look at the chart because it just, even though I can see it in plain print, what the numbers are going to look like, it just really kind of sticks out in the chart. And I agree with you. We're going to talk about a couple other races where I've already made adjustments. One of them we already did, the Tampa Bay Derby. There's another one coming up, and this is probably going to be a third one. I've already done the other two, but haven't done this one yet. And yeah, I agree. But going forward, I wouldn't really use this race to analyze any of these horses going forward. It's a race that we're likely not to see develop this way again.
Let's stay on the turf and talk about another graded stakes, the Florida Oaks. This was the race that did not go official for, what was it, like 7 hours afterwards, due to that. This was right on the cusp of that tote delay. Waskasoo, who got hammered all the way down to 5-2. I mean, I liked her quite a bit in this race. I don't think that was a great price on her, but clearly a lot of people saw what I did, that she had a tough trip when she made her 3-year-old debut at Gulfstream in January. And just got a much better trip this day, Craig. She got that perfect journey sitting in behind the leaders, was never right on the rail, but she saved enough ground, more ground than she had in her prior race. And when she tipped out at the top of the stretch, you could just see she was going to get it done. She ended up winning this race fairly comfortably by a length. I thought some horses ran some nice races in behind her, but Waskesiu was the best on the day.
Yeah, she was definitely best. She got a much better trip on this day and kind of backed up what we saw in her debut back at Aqueduct. She got a 107 Timeform US speed figure for the win, and I really liked the way she did it. She rated a little more off the pace than she had in the debut, but not quite as far back as she had been in her stakes debut, and just a good effort for her. And I think this is going to be a dangerous 3-year-old filly on turf for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I mean, it was a race that was falling apart a little bit at the end. I mean, just look at the third place finisher who closed from way back to get up for third, almost finishing second in this race, making that final move. So I think you might want to take a look at some horses that were up close to the pace. I thought the number 1 Poolside with Slim actually ran really well in her turf debut to just miss hanging on for second. She didn't make the front end like she had when she had gotten so comfortable leading in that maiden victory at Gulfstream Park on the synth. But I thought she held on pretty well and got the same Timeform US speed figure as the winner of this race, a 107. So she's one that I would look to give another chance to when she comes back, likely in another turf race next time.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad you mentioned the speed figure because she's the only one, and she finished back and forth, a length and a quarter behind. Style points, she ran fine. We had talked about she got a perfect trip last time. She got a very good trip this time, but I don't want to take anything away from her. She's a pretty good filly. I mean, you have to be able to take advantage of good trips, and she's one that seems to just show up and run a race every single time after her debut.
Craig, the money seemed to be exceptionally smart at Tampa Bay Downs this week, and well, also this day, but also this entire week, because we're going to talk about another race that had horse go off at a very short price and win that looked like they knew ahead of time. But I don't know if you were expecting to get 7-2 on Full Nelson when you liked him in the Columbia. It was a good call by you. This horse, though, obviously had shown some ability in his prior 2 starts on the turf at Tampa and was able to step up against the tougher field here and get it done again.
Yeah, this was one of those horses that had been helped by the Timeform US algorithm via his speed figures, and he's coming out of races that all had blue fractions, and he showed he was a little more versatile than he might have looked on paper. Good effort by him, and I mean, he won this race fairly easily. I'm curious what you think of the runner-up, Fulmineo, and his trip. I still haven't went back to watch it. I know we talked a little offline. Seemed like he lost focus or something happened to him, and he ran fine. And they were the 2 horses I liked in this race, so this one worked out very well for me, but not quite at the price for the winner that I was expecting.
No, I mean, I was sort of in disbelief when I saw how this race was getting bet that Fulmineo was 7-1 and Full Nelson was half that price. I mean, I think we both agreed Fulmineo was the horse to beat in this race, and maybe he was. I mean, he ran pretty well, had to cover a little more ground than Full Nelson, and breaking from the outside post, that's always going to be a disadvantage in a race like this when you're never able to get over to the inside. As for what happened in upper stretch, I think Sammy Camacho got away with one because he drifted out about 3 paths from the time they turned into the lane to about the 3/16 pole and clearly interfered with 2 horses in a jam and Fulmineo. I wouldn't say that the result would have changed. I get the steward. I mean, I think the stewards probably should have looked at it, but I would not have made a disqualification because at the end of the day, the winner won by nearly 2 lengths. And Fulmineo was able to gather himself and take a shot at that one and settle for second. I think maybe there could have been a disqualification if Fulmineo had not gotten up for second in this race, but he clearly had his path taken away from him at the top of the stretch. He ran fine to be second in here. The top 2 were clearly the 2 best horses. Whereas the third place finisher moved to gold, got a better trip, and was just sort of picking up pieces late in a race that did feature a fairly honest pace.
Yeah, I was really baffled by the favorite in this race. I don't even think we discussed him at all.
No, we didn't mention him at all on the forecast.
Yeah, well, I was thinking when I was watching the betting, I was like in a jam. And I mean, I remembered him, of course. I looked at him, but that was kind of as even more shocking to me than Full Nelson being 7-2. But these 3-year-old turf races are tough. A lot of these horses, we don't exactly know what you have, but I think we had a couple pretty good ones here who I would expect to see in graded stakes.
And let's finish up our Tampa action by discussing a race from earlier in the week on their Wednesday card. The final race of the day on Wednesday, race 9, was a maiden claiming event. I don't think we've talked about too many maiden claiming races that we recap on the Timeform US Pacecast, Craig, that have gotten notable speed figures, but this horse, Saybrook, making the second start of his career from a 10-1 morning line, got hammered down to 9-5 after doing no running in his debut, and runs off the screen here like he's a future stakes horse. What do you make of this one?
I don't know what to make of it. I have to tell you, when I think I did the speed figures for this card, I don't even remember. But if not, I know when I processed the worksheets, I went, whoa, wait, what's going on here with the maiden claimer? Went back, watched the race, looked over the worksheet. I mean, you really kind of had to give him this type speed figure. Maybe it could be, when you look at the other horses, maybe it's a little on the high side, but it's not like it's out of the question. These are 3-year-olds. All the other horses moved up 5, 6, maybe 10 points, but that's not shocking for 3-year-olds. So it's a race that we put the F notation on because most of the horses in here were pretty lightly raced. It was the last race of the day, so it's not like you could say there were other races on either side that were 100% confident, but it seems like a legit figure. If you watch the race, it's kind of hard to doubt it.
Yeah, I mean, this was impressive. I mean, this horse did get fairly comfortable up front, but when they asked him at the top of the stretch, I mean, he just kicked into another gear and opened up almost a dozen lengths on this field. I agree. The number seems a little high for some horses in behind. You did give this race the F notation, indicating that there were lightly raced horses in here, and it's not one that you have full confidence in. But I mean, the race right before was a 6-furlong dirt race. Actually, this entire day was dirt racing, as I think they came off the turf this card. And he just objectively ran faster than those older allowance horses in the prior race. So I don't know. I mean, obviously, people knew this horse was a lot better than his debut. Just out of curiosity, I did go back and watch that race from September at Gulfstream. And what I'll say is the rider that was on him that day appeared unable to control him. It's an interesting replay to watch if you want to go back and watch Saybrook's debut, because clearly this horse was better than the result that day. I don't think anybody would have predicted him to come back, or anybody reasonable would have predicted he would come back and win by 12 lengths and get a 113 Timeform US speed figure. But clearly there was something weird going on in his debut race where he was prevented from running as fast as he maybe could. But they got away with one here, Craig. Was not claimed for $40,000, and I wonder where we'll see him next, because it's highly unusual to see a horse earn a fig like this in a maiden claiming race.
Yeah, and honestly, I doubt we would have talked about it if he wasn't a 3-year-old. But being a 3-year-old, he's still got a lot of room to go. So hard to say. I mean, it's not like this horse took money first time out. He was 47-1 in a Florida-bred maiden special weight race. So definitely one I've entered into my stable mail.
Let's move on to Santa Anita to talk about the only Grade 1 race of this past weekend. That was the Beholder Mile on Saturday. And, Craig, I know you just got in the final speed figures and pace figures for this card. I'll be interested to see what the pace line of this Beholder Mile looks like, because from a visual standpoint, it kind of felt like they just handed Sweet Azteca the race. She was stretching out for the first time for Michael McCarthy. Had obviously shown ability, this 4-year-old filly. In her prior race, she could not have been more impressive, winning a sprint, getting away with some slow fractions. In this race, it felt like the rider on Adair Manor, who seemed like her main pace rival, just came away from the gate with the plan to not contest the lead and to rate in behind horses. And it just allowed Sweet Azteca to get very comfortable on the front end. She kicked away and was able to hold off Adair Manor, who fired a big shot at her, but could just not overcome the winner's pace advantage.
Yeah, this one's pretty good. It is going to be slow fractions, it looks like. I don't remember the exact numbers in the algorithm, but it's definitely an ascending pace line, and enough that I think they'll all be coded in blue. But yeah, it's still a pretty good effort by her. She's going to wind up with a 118 Timeform US speed figure. I think that's downgraded just a couple points because of that slow pace, but good, strong effort from her. I mean, obviously she had things go her own way, but I also think this is a pretty good filly.
I would agree with that. She's lightly raced. I think this was just the fourth victory of her career. I think she's now 4 for 5, and or maybe I'm sorry, she might be 3 for 4. She is a horse who obviously could not make it to the race as much as a 3-year-old, but since she's come back as a 4-year-old, she's improved with each start. She obviously handled the stretch out to a mile here, though I think the way this race unfolded helped her in that sense. I'll be interested to see what kind of horse she really turns out to be moving forward. If she's the kind of horse that they could point to the Breeders' Cup distaff. I know we're getting, months down the line. That's a ways away. But to me, I don't know if I'm totally convinced that she's a routing type based on this one effort, just given the trip that she was able to pull. It was a nice effort from Adair Manor, who was second, because like I said, she's a horse who last year got some very good trips and very favorable pace scenarios, setting slow paces when she was successful in a number of graded stakes events. And I thought she rated well here and came with a good finish, just could not catch the winner of this race. They pulled well clear of the rest. Green Up and Desert Dawn, who were third and fourth. They're nice horses. They were just no match for the top two. So I understand this race getting a fast fig. I'll just be interested to see if these two match up at another dirt route down the line, if the result is the same, and if the tactics employed are the same.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting to see Green Up. It really helped with the speed figure to see a shipper come in. We don't often see that, particularly in the dirt races out west. And she ran fine. She's a horse who's had trouble getting to the races as of late, but it definitely helps me have more confidence in the number.
Well, Craig, another stakes race that they ran on the dirt on Saturday was the Grade 3 Santa Isabel. I believe this one does offer points towards the Kentucky Oaks, though the winner of this race obviously will not be participating there, with her being trained by Bob Baffert, and that is Kinza. And I'm going to say, Craig, there's a lot of talk about Nysos being far and away the best 3-year-old male right now, and some consternation that he won't be able to participate in the Kentucky Derby. I would say that Kinza's current advantage over her class of 3-year-old fillies might be even greater than Nysos' advantage over the 3-year-old males right now, just based on what we've seen relative to each other in these divisions. I mean, she's run fast in every single start, and personally, I was most impressed by this race of any that she's put forth so far.
Yeah, speed figure wise, it's going to be her best. This one had a faster pace. She gets a little bit some pace upgrade in this one, all the way up to a 119 Timeform US speed figure. It's one of those races where she didn't really run as fast as Sweet Azteca did, but because of the pace, she's going to get a bit of a pace upgrade. But that's it. She's obviously very good. She went out, she set the pace. It was pretty quick. I think it's going to be in red fractions, which is why she gets, I think it's 5 or 6 points of pace upgrade in here, and just kept running away from them. So I haven't seen a better filly than her yet this year. It would be nice if we could see some chippers, but we're not going to get to see that with her. She's just probably going to be competing against California-based horses for the foreseeable future. But there's no doubt she's a very talented runner.
Yeah, and this was a much faster pace than the Beholder Mile. I mean, you look at the raw fractions and you see it. I mean, 45 and 4.5 in the Santa Isabel versus 47 and 2 in the Beholder Mile. And I think you also have to take into account, Craig, and I know you do when you make the pace figures, but I'm just mentioning for the listeners, there's a longer run up to the 1 mile race at Santa Anita. I'm looking it up in the chart now. I think there's 170 feet run up to the mile race, and an 85-foot run up to the mile in the 16th race, or that's what they used on Saturday. And so you would expect the pace of the Beholder Mile to be a little faster, when actually it was way slower than the Santa Isabel. So I think Kinza deserves credit for going as fast as she did up front and still earning a respectable final time number, which was legitimately upgraded when you look at the Timeform US speed figure. And Craig, the number makes sense because horses behind her, they had already run some fast numbers. I mean, Where's My Ring and Ultimate Authority were coming out of a very fast maiden event. And I think they ran their races here. They were just no match for a horse that's a lot better than them. So it's probably going to be a little while before we see Kinza get a real test against the best 3-year-old fillies out there. But she's got a lot of talent. And she's also a New York bred, by the way. I just learned that about her looking up her pedigree.
And I mean, I should know, I mentioned only facing California-based runners. They could very well be the best of the rest based on
Mhm.
speed figures. The horses in behind had run as fast as the top horses in the division. So I don't want to knock this group. Like the 3-year-old Colts, yeah, there's really nothing behind the Bob Baffert runners. Not the case with the fillies.
The fourth race of the day at Santa Anita on Saturday was a maiden special weight event, going 6.5 furlongs for the 3-year-olds that looked loaded on the way in. Plenty of pedigrees in here, runners from high profile barns, and including a couple from the Bob Baffert stable. I will say it's somewhat refreshing to see Baffert not dominate a race like this, as we had some different connections filling out the trifecta and superfecta here. And it was the Luis Mendez trained firster Vlahos who just ran this field off their feet, went fast from the start, dueled through quick fractions, and then pulled away on the stretch. I would imagine this was a difficult speed figure to have confidence in, Craig, just given the lack of experience of the entire field coming in, but it certainly appeared to be a very fast race.
It did. It was one when I was doing the looking at the rundown that you sent, trying to figure out what the speed figure would be. I wasn't really sure. If you just use the other sprint race, it was going to be around 126. And that was with a pretty significant pace upgrade of about 7 points, which would leave it around 119. I didn't really know. I guessed it would be around a 123, just knowing how my assistant does figures and knowing California. He actually came back even a little lower at a 120. And I don't really have an argument with that. There wasn't a whole lot to go on in this race. I think only two of the horses that even run before. It was a case where there were only two dirt routes after the race, one sprint race before it, no other sprint. So tough number to make. The one thing I will confidently say is this horse was fast. The first thing I did when I looked at the worksheet was go and check out the time and make sure it was fine. It's a really skewed angle at 6.5 furlongs, but best I could tell, and I mean, I'm drawing lines on my computer, drawing the slanted start line, and it looks pretty spot on to me. So I don't think there were any issues with the timing. I just think this was a very fast horse.
They certainly appeared to be moving up front from a visual standpoint. I know 21 and 2 does seem like an outrageously fast opening quarter mile, but 6.5 furlong races, they've got a decent run up. I think it's 85 feet. So you can see a fast quarter for that distance. This horse is fast, the winner. I don't think I'm going out on a limb by saying that. I think the question is what he's going to want to do moving forward. There is some route pedigree on the dam side. Actually, his dam is a full sister to a horse named Are You Kidding Me, who some people might remember from years ago. He was a $1 million+ earner. He ran a lot at Woodbine. I think he won one of those races, the Dominion Day, or one of those like 3 times, those graded stakes that they ran over route distances on the Tapeta. So there's route pedigree on the dam side, but he is a Cantharos, and when you watch the replay, he really does just kind of look all sprint. So clearly a very fast horse. We'll see what he ultimately develops into, but an exciting prospect. And, Craig, there were some others in behind, some who are making their debut, so you probably want to follow moving forward out of this race. Some horses that did some running to pass horses in this stretch that might appreciate more ground down the line. So this could be a live race for the future.
Yeah, definitely. He definitely looked like a sprinter to me. I was curious why when you were talking. I looked up Are You Kidding Me, who I remember. He actually won, I think it was the Eclipse Stakes 3 times. He did win the Dominion Day. He won a ton of stakes races. So obviously a very good one, but it's hard to watch that race and not think this horse is a sprinter, in my opinion. Obviously he's lately raced, but I would be surprised if he's able to go around 2 turns.
One more race to discuss from Santa Anita last week was a Friday allowance race. It was the 4th race of the day, a second level allowance won by the Bob Baffert trained Flying Drummer. Craig, we haven't seen too much of this horse over the years. He's a 5-year-old gelding now who's made a limited number of starts and hasn't really run in a stakes race ever since he was a maiden. But clearly this horse has stakes potential based on what he did last week. Beat a field that had plenty of back class and looked like he was going to have a fight on his hands coming around the far turn to the quarter pole. But as soon as the jock got into him, this horse just laid down his neck and really went on for the wire and kind of broke away from this field to win going away at the end. This was a good effort. We'll see if he can do it against tougher next time, but feels like a horse that's earned a shot against Stakes Company.
Yeah, hopefully he can stay on the track, and he's now had 2 starts. All he's had some really long layoffs in his career, one like a year and a half, another a good 9 months, but now he's put 2 races back together, and he's a horse that's always had some talent, and he really showed it here running a career best 119 time form US speed figure. Um, I like the way he did it. It's not like he was on the lead. He tracked off a John Sadler horse in here who had shown some ability. And once he turned for home, I mean, this race was over. It just said that the horses behind him, maybe they're not in top form now. They had been better horses earlier in their career, but he did exactly what he had to do and did it very stylishly. So I would assume stakes are in his future as well.
Move on to Gulfstream Park, where the feature race there on Saturday was the Grade 3 Hurricane Birdie. And Craig, nice to see the winner of this race, red carpet ready, get back to top form. She was a horse that had really sort of come to the fore at this time last year as a 3-year-old filly sprinter. Things went a little bit awry halfway through her campaign in the summer, and she went to the sidelines after a loss to Maple Leaf Mel. But she came back here and looked better than ever. Got a good trip, stalking some speeds, but she put in that strong kick coming to the quarter pole that we had grown accustomed to seeing out of her last year, and a nice start to the year for a horse that could have a big season in this division.
For sure. I thought this was a really good effort. She ran a career best 117 time form US speed figure, which is what you like to see when a 4-year-old returns from a layoff. You don't want to see her running below her 3-year-old figure. So I would say the future's looking pretty bright for this one. She started her career very well. She was improving. Something happened in that last race, but whatever it was, she clearly recovered. And I expect this to be a dangerous sprinter in the older female division.
Also on Saturday was the Silks Run. This was a 5-furlong turf sprint run just before the Hurricane Birdie for the older horses. And the Dale Romans trained Coppola caused the minor upset here. Let go at 7-1, despite the fact that he was coming off a stakes victory under these exact same conditions in his prior start. Was a half-length winner that day and a half-length winner again on Saturday, getting a very good trip under Edgar Zayas.
Yeah, I guess part of that was because of Big Invasion being in here, a horse with a big reputation, returning from a bit of a layoff after narrowly missing in the Breeders' Cup Sprint, and a horse like Coppola was overlooked. But he was able to get the job done. He was able to improve his speed figure once again, this time up to a 118. So he's a horse that just keeps getting better. Big Invasion, I don't know if you want to give him, how much of an excuse you want to give him in here. It seems maybe just a little bit short for him, though he almost got it done in the Breeders' Cup Sprint at this distance. It's Gulfstream's not exactly a course that's made for him, I would say.
No, I know he had success at Gulfstream early in his career, and he's won stakes here before, but especially with the way this course plays these days at Gulfstream, 5 furlongs, it's just so tough to make up ground from off the pace. And Big Invasion over the years has turned into much more of that deep closing type as opposed to early in his career when he had better tactical speed. I think given the way his running style is currently as a 5-year-old, it's just tough to make up that amount of ground. So I'm not going to be too hard on him for losing this race at a very short price. I'd imagine that we'll see better from him when he gets to a different venue, likely in his next start. The second and third place finishers, they dead heated for that position, going out for the same barn, both likable hard knockers than at this turf and synth sprinters. Yes, I Am Free. It feels like he's been around forever. He's an 8-year-old now who's been right there at the wire in many of these turf sprint stakes. He was a big price this day at 11-1 and almost pulled off the upset, but had to settle for that share of second.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would not be surprised if I went back and found whatever our first time form US Pacecast was, and we were talking about Yes, I Am Free, because it just seems like he's been running in these 5 furlong turf stakes forever and running very well.
Let's talk about one more race from Gulfstream Park last week. That was the final race on Sunday, the 10th race on that card. Sweet Rebecca made her career debut. She was the only first-time starter in this field, going out for Brendan Walsh, full sister to Turf Stakes winner Sweet Melania. And this one definitely put forth a good effort on debut, Craig, and feels like one that could have stakes potential in the very near future.
For sure. I don't. This is the one race we're doing where I don't have the exact speed figure for. I'm guessing it's going to be around the 106, which isn't very far off of what we talked about with Waskesiu at Tampa in the Florida Oaks. This was an impressive effort, and it's not like Brandon Walsh is known for having horses ready to fly out their first time. It's not a terrible stat for him, but it's not something he's known for. And I almost wonder if this one didn't catch him a little bit surprised, because this was a really good effort.
Yeah, to me, it wasn't just the speed figure. It was the way that she did it. I mean, she had trouble at the start, got bumped a little bit, had to be mildly checked. She got a little keen into that clubhouse turn, and then just always was traveling well at the back of the pack. And this is not one of those Gulfstream races that went to closers. I mean, typically we see speed be very dangerous at Gulfstream, and the runner-up in this race was actually the 9-5 favorite and led every step of the way until Sweet Rebecca overhauled her, making that big close from last to first. So if anything, I think you might want to upgrade from a pace and race flow standpoint this winter. And watching the replay, the way that she was able to, just extend her stride through the stretch, this feels like a horse that has quite a bit of quality. Like I said, she's that full to sweet Melania. This damn sweet and discreet just produces really nice movers. I've seen a few of her foals on the racetrack, and they just all have this nice floaty extension to their stride like Sweet Rebecca does. So I'll be very interested to see if she moves up into Stakes Company directly next time, because she feels like the kind of horse that we're going to hear some things from in this 3-year-old filly turf division down the line. And then we'll finish up this podcast by talking about a couple of races from Hot Springs, Arkansas, Oaklawn Park last weekend. The Saturday feature was the Grade 2 Azeri, and this one resulted in an upset, Craig, as Tiny Temper, who was making her stakes debut here, a horse who we haven't seen too much of on the racetrack. I mean, she's had a couple of long layoffs during her career. It's sort of been tough to keep this daughter of Arrogate going, but seems like Dallas Stewart has her in form now, as I think she was making just the 5th or 6th start of her career. And this was a nice ride by James Graham, who seemed like he was almost riding this race just to pick up a piece after she got his poor start, saved ground, cut the corner at the top of the stretch, just trying to make up some ground. And suddenly she was in position to win and was able to get there, just getting her head in front of the wire.
This was one I was happy about as the speed figure maker for Timeform US, because and I think my assistant does it, so not tooting my own horn, but she was coming out of a off the turf race at Fairgrounds, and she actually ran that day as fast as any of the runners in here speed figure wise. I think with the pace adjustment or the weight adjustments, she had the top last race Timeform US speed figure. So it was interesting to me. She went off at a big price, but that said, the ride had a lot to do with this. She just saved all the ground. It seemed like the winner was going to come from the outside, and all of a sudden she just kind of appeared on the inside and was really game to the wire, which she kind of showed in her last race too, where she had a real battle down the stretch with the runner up that day. There was a huge gap back to third. So this is a filly that has some fight in her. Now, this was a Grade 2 stake for older horses. She only is getting a 113 Timeform US speed figure, so not the strongest group that we're going to see. I think she's going to have to get better if she wants to move into races like, Grade 1 races. I don't know who's going to show up in the Apple Blossom, but I would assume it would be a tougher competition than this. But just a real gritty, tough filly that I was happy to see win on Saturday.
Yeah, just the 5th start of her career, 2nd start off a layoff. She had earned that big fig coming back in a layoff, going all the way back to Ellis Park last August. And that really was the only poor performance of her career. And she's probably not a horse whose running style suits Ellis. But she's run well in all of her other starts, including this one. So definitely a horse with plenty of upside. She's one of these late blooming daughters of Arrogate, that we've seen come along this sire. They just seem to keep getting better as they go longer and they get older. And Tiny Temper definitely fits that profile. But as you said, Craig, this was not a particularly fast race for the level. Hot and Sultry took all the money in this race, somewhat surprisingly, at least to me. I've never quite gotten this filly. I know she ran a big race, big speed figure in the Chaluki last fall at Churchill, but I just have never been convinced that she's a 2-turn horse. And I think she kind of proved once again that she's got serious questions going this far. And it's also just been a rough go this year for Norm Cassie. He had a huge winter last season at Oaklawn Park, and it's just been the totally opposite story this season. She failed to show up. There were some other no-shows in this race. The runner-up Misty Vale, I don't know where she came up with this performance from. I mean, her form coming into this race was just not quite up to the level that you would think would be good enough to nearly win a grade 2, but she showed up in a big way for Mike Maker. So just a tough race to really know what to make of from an overall result standpoint. But the winner definitely seems like one that still has upside. We'll close out this podcast by mentioning one more race from last weekend at Oaklawn Park. That was a Sunday allowance race, the 8th race on the card, won by the Steve Asmussen Sprinter Gun Pilot. This is a horse that was briefly on the Kentucky Derby Trail last year. Didn't really work out. They tried to turn him back in some races like the Pat Day Mile and the Woody Stevens, just kind of tailed off a little bit. But since Steve Asmussen has brought him back as a 4-year-old and turned him back to 6 furlongs, it's like he's a new horse. I mean, he's been very impressive in his last couple of starts. And Craig, I know you want to talk a little bit about this speed figure because it seemed visually impressive. When I watched it, I was kind of convinced it was going to be a fast race. And it turned out to not be that fast of a time on the day. But I think it's one that you have some questions about.
It definitely is. It's one when I made the speed figures for this one and I do it myself. It actually came back a really slow race. And obviously, Oaklawn is a track where all the races are in dirt. It was a wet, drying out track. And this was one where the speed figure just didn't really make a whole lot of sense. I went with it anyway. I gave that end notation. I should note the track was labeled fast this day, but Saturday had been a wet track all day. So even though it was fast, I do think there was some moisture, and it was one the figure just didn't make sense. But I went with the variant, and when it went into the chart, I was like, this just can't be. I mean, the horse won easy by 3.5 lengths. The runners up and behind, the way I did it, all tailed off, like all of the other horses had notable drops in their speed figures. And it's just one of those cases where it simply doesn't make sense. And I decided to change that N, which means we could have broken it out, but we didn't, to a B where we are going to break it out. And that gives Gun Pilot a 122 Timeform US speed figure. Am I totally confident in that? Absolutely not. Because, I mean, the clock says that he didn't run all that fast, particularly when you look at the other races. I mean, there was a dirt race right after his for maiden claimers that fit in line with all the other races on the card. This one was the stick out. So it's one I'll be keeping an eye out, but I just wasn't comfortable with what was originally a 109 speed figure and all five of the other horses taking big drops off their prior form.
Yeah, and you just look at the second and third place finishers in this race, Excess Magic and Sir Wellington, and in their prior 2 starts, they had been chasing home the likes of Skelly and Rivet, and even prior to that, Tejano Twist. And I mean, losing to those foes, not by huge margins, by 3 and 4 lengths. And Gun Pilot was able to beat them by a very similar margin. So, watching this race in real time, I kind of thought to myself, oh, Steve Asmussen's got another really good sprinter to go along with Rivet and Skelly of similar quality. And obviously, this race came back much slower than those did. But when you take into consideration all of those factors, I think it was a tough call, Craig, and I can't disagree with you deciding to upgrade this number a bit because it did appear that Gun Pilot had stepped forward to beat 2 very nice, consistent sprinters at Oaklawn. So I'm sure we'll get to see him in Stakes Company in the near future, and we'll find out if that upgrade is correct. But he does appear to be a horse that has really taken to this turn back in distance.
Yeah, and that's why we do the system that we do, the question mark system, as we call it, because it used to just be a question mark. Now we give you codes that tell you it's a B and that it was a broken out number. So, use some caution if you're going to bet. Don't trust that figure 100%. But it's a case where I just couldn't put those lower figures in the PPs, and I'd rather I'm just going to trust the numbers that every horse in this field didn't regress substantially.
Well, that brings us to the end of this week's rundown. We've got a rare week off from the Kentucky Derby preps this week, Craig, as we look ahead to next weekend. No points preps on tap, and then we'll start coming out as Fast and Furious again. We get to the final couple weekends in March and then into April, and by that point, things will be fairly settled moving on to the Kentucky Derby. So it's a light racing schedule this week. I think we're still debating exactly what we're going to talk about on the Timeform US forecast. We might do one of those wagers that's a combination of tracks. We'll see exactly how those come up, but we'll try to find something interesting to chat about for the forecast this upcoming Friday.
Yeah, frankly, I don't mind having a week off from the Derby preps. It'll be a little refreshing. Not that I don't love the Derby preps, but it's good to keep your options open.
Well, everybody, thanks for tuning in to the Timeform US Pacecast this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch that Timeform US forecast coming up in the second half of the week.